Well, the jointer is all up in operation and it works like a charm. Got that spiral cutting bit on there with the carbide bits on it, and it makes a beautiful finish. The only thing about it is it doesn't cut near as deep as what the old cut knives would have. So hogging material off is not going to be the strong suit on that. But it makes a beautiful finish. So the jointer is ready to go, but the weather is still too bad to do anything with it. Anyway, off the 2x6s, I'm just going to joint one side of them, and then I have to do something else with the other side to get those uniform, to get them squared up and to get a nice clean face and a uniform width on them. I could try running those through the planer, but it's a pain in the butt doing that through the planer. Generally, what I've done in the past is stack 3 of them up together and kind of gang plane them, but that entails driving screws or nails into the 2x6s to hold them all together, clamping them, and then that kind of defeats the purpose, because that kind of makes a mark on the 2x6s wherever you have those held together like that. The other option I've used in the past is ripping them on the radial arm saw, setting that up for a rip cut and running them through that. Several years ago, I bought this little table saw. And we found this on an advertising site when we were on our way home one time from down south. We had a trailer loaded full of stuff bringing home, and we were on our way. It was going to be a quick trip. We had to catch the ferry in Prince Rupert, so didn't have really time to stop and check anything out. But I found this thing on a advertising newspaper in Little Nickel or something like that. Well, we called the guy and stopped in and picked it up. When I got it, I thought that it was a Delta Unisaw. Well, once we got home, I found out that it's what they call a hybrid saw. What a hybrid saw is they take the guts, the mechanism inside of a contractor's saw, and they put it in a cabinet. So it's not a unisaw. I never had a chance to look it over real good when we got it. It was dark, and like I said, rainy, and we were on our way home, and we had to make a quick trip to get through the Canadian border to customs and stuff to be on our way. So we loaded it up and brought it home, and it's kicked around in here, covered up or around in a corner for years. I've had this longer than I had the shaper. I never got a chance to use it or get it out and set it up and use it. The radial arm saw was just so much easier to use because it was on wheels and I could wheel it over, bring it out and use it, and I was used to using it. I've had it for 40 years, 50 years now. Anyway, it's time to get that thing out and clean it up and use it. The tabletop's not too bad. It doesn't have mice piss on it and stuff anyway, so it's got a little rust on it. Mainly the color on it is from the preservative coating that I put on it, but the interior of it, the guts of it, aren't working. I barely get the saw arbor to move, and I can't get the tilt, and there's a few pieces that are not on it that I took off and have stored up overhead. I'm going to have to get the ladder out so I can get in there and get that stuff out. But meanwhile, I got to take this thing apart and clean it up and get it ready to use. Tomorrow is supposed to be another rainy day, 60% chance of rain. We'll see what happens tomorrow. If it clears up a little bit and doesn't look like it's going to rain for a while, I can open the doors up on the hangar, get the planer out of there and joint those. If not, I've got a project here to work on to get this thing cleaned up and working. Well, anyway, that's what I'm working on now. I just dug it out of the corner, and it hasn't seen the light of day for a long time, but it's out here now. I'll go through it and get it fixed up. So the first thing I'm going to do is get my rag that I've got saturated with paint thinner and old oil and stuff that's come off of those other machines, and just lay it over the top of that. Now that's a nice cast iron table on there, so it's not a bad machine. It's just not a unisaw or a cabinet saw. Anyway, we'll see if we can't get it working. I'll put that rag on there, saturated with some paint thinner, let it soak for a while and soften up all of that grease and a preservative grease that's on there before we do anything else. Dug that table saw out of there yesterday to start getting it cleaned up to use to rip these 2x6s, and probably use it for some other things too when the time comes along here. It was kind of crudded up. That thing had a whole bunch of attachments or a bunch of stuff that went with it, that I'd forgotten about. It's got a big wide table that fits on the right side of the saw blade, and then a big overhead hermaphroditic device to use for the saw guard that mounts on it somehow and goes over the top and then down over the saw blade. Big expensive thing, I think. And then it has a real nice fence attachment on it. A real long fence. It must be 5 feet long or so, maybe 6 feet long. Anyway, all of that stuff was up overhead on a shelf in the back of the hangar there. I drug it all down. Most of that's all in pretty good shape. It needs a little bit of cleanup. I got a wing that goes on that tabletop that comes out on the left side, and that needs to be cleaned up a little bit. But I don't need a whole bunch of that stuff for what I want to do here with just ripping these 2x6s down. Anyway, this table saw Arbor needed some work on it. It's froze up, and so I decided to take it all apart and clean everything up, check the bearings out. And to do that, I got to take the tabletop off. Looked online yesterday, and I finally found a manual for it. Vintage Machinery has a manual on their website for this. I come out today to start working on it, take it apart, and I got that tabletop off of the cabinet, and it all comes off with all the Arbor and everything together. It's just held onto that cabinet with 4 bolts. There was only 3 bolts in there, and the rest of them were already all loose, finger tight, so I just took those out of there. But then you gotta jockey it around. You've got 2 shafts on there, one that adjusts the blade angle and one that adjusts the blade depth, and both of those were kind of froze up, but they stick out through that cabinet. The one for the angle goes out through a pretty small hole on the right side, and the one for the depth of cut comes out the front. So those have pins in them. You had to take the pins out of them. They're just roll pins. The adjustment handles line up on those roll pins, and that's what they key onto to adjust the saw up and down and back and forth and whatever. So anyway, those pins had to come out of there, and then on the front of it there's a indicator for the angle of cut, and that had to come off. Once I got those off, then it just had to move everything around enough until I could get it to come up off there, the cabinet to come up off there. I figure out how to get that motor off of there, take that Arbor and everything apart and clean everything up and get everything working good. It had a whole bunch of sawdust packed in every place and was holding moisture in there, sawdust in on things. It didn't get cleaned up before it was put away last time, and that wasn't from me, that was from whoever I bought it from. And then of course I didn't clean it up or anything when I got it. So that's the motor and the Arbor there, and that's just bolted onto the top, the tabletop. It's a nice heavy duty cast iron top, so that's good. And I think that thing is simple enough. I think it's the same table they use on their higher quality cabinet saws, and so the cabinet base would just bolt up to that. In this case it's a cabinet to make it a quasi cabinet saw. This is the underside of the table saw table, and this casting, the table itself is in really good shape underneath it. It had some sawdust and stuff caked in there. Well, some sawdust caked in there. This is the Arbor. It was bolted down in 2 spots here. The castings for the Arbor are actually in pretty good shape. The paint's still intact on them, and this is the slide here where the tilt mechanism slides back and forth, pivots on this groove right here. That's in good shape, both the front one, the back one, but again they got all kinds of sawdust caked in it. But paint is intact and they're not rusty. This is the worm that adjusts the angle of the saw blade, and it's a little bit rusty, but it's actually not too bad a shape. It turns stiff inside of this casting here, but the casting is in good shape, and so this shaft is a little bit rusty, and the worm is okay. Well, this is the main, whoop, got stuck in there. This is the main Arbor here that this what the saw attaches to. The V-belt here from the motor goes on that, and that is in pretty good shape there. A little bit of rust on that shaft, but not a whole lot of buildup on it. A little buildup on the casting around it, but the shaft turns smoothly. That feels really good. Again, these end pieces here are in pretty good shape. These got two bars that go across here that hold stiffeners that hold the thing apart. Those are pretty rusty. I'll probably take those off and clean those up. But right now we've got this worm and pinion here that adjusts the blade height, blade up and down, and that's froze up. I can get it to move just a little bit, and it comes up against the stop here for the depth, but I can't get it to go up. This rack here for the angle is in good shape, and that rack down there looks pretty good. A little bit of surface rust on the face of it, but I can't get it to turn, to pivot. So we'll take it apart some more, but it's good that the castings and everything are all in good shape on this. The bottom of this table is in good shape. All of that is in real good shape. This is the pivot pins that the motor pivots on here. You get a little bit of rust on them, but nothing that won't clean up. I don't even have to take those out, I don't think. Now that's one of the problems, is you get this sawdust caked on everything, and that attracts moisture and holds it in, and then the acids in the wood and the moisture, they really cause things to rust. I thought maybe this rack on this height adjustment was just full of crap, but it doesn't appear like it's that bad. The pins probably froze up there where that it pivots on. I'll take this pinion shaft and the pinion gear off of there and see what I can do to further disassemble this Arbor assembly here. But so far, most of this stuff looks good. This will clean up pretty nice here, polish out that hole there. I don't know, let's see. I think it'll probably be alright the way it is. I was thinking maybe bore that out and put a bronze bushing or a couple bronze bushings in there or something, but we'll see how it goes, how ambitious I get on that. But this is the main thing I'm going to work on here, that depth adjustment on that Arbor. Well, that was interesting. This pinion gear is held onto the shaft with a roll pin, and then it's adjusted in here with a nut on this shaft here. So I drove that roll pin out of there, and then I tried to get that pinion gear off of there so I could take that shaft out. Well, the pinion gear won't come off there. I'd have to take it out, put it on the press or something and press it out like that, because I do want to get it off of there. But while I was fooling around with it, moving it around, I thought maybe since that rack was froze up, that if I threaded this in or out or whichever way it went, came up against the rack, that would push that off there. That nut, this nut here would act as a press to push that off while I was turning it against that rack. Well, the rack started moving instead. So I took the Arbor off, and there's a dog point screw going down through this main casting right here into it. I took that screw out of there, and then this is the pivot pin that goes on that. And so the dog point screw holds this portion of it tight, and this is smaller diameter in this casting here, and then it pivots on these two. Well, it started moving on that. So anyway, I drove that out. I can take that up and polish it up, and I have to decide whether I want to put some bronze bushings or brass bushings in there or not. I'll have to look and see what I've got for bushings. Anyway, I got that off of there, and it's moving, and I can polish these. Well, this hole won't matter because it doesn't pivot on that, and these holes are pretty well polished out from driving that shaft out of there. Well, anyway, now I got to figure out how I'm going to get that pinion gear off of there, because I still want to clean this shaft all up and that hole there. This is pretty much the same thing here. See, there's the pinion gear there, and it's held on with a roll pin right there. Oh, and this one is really rough. I want to do something with that to get it smoothed up too. Well, I guess that's how you can adjust where the pinion gear contacts the worm, is by changing the threads on this a little bit as it all wears. So it looks like I'm going to have to take this casting off the end here so that I can get this in on the press and try to press that pinion gear off there. And I want to take these bars off here anyway and clean those up and probably paint them with. Okay. So these are self-locking nuts. They've got a crimp and a rubber seal in there, or plastic in there, so that when they go on, that plastic shrinks down around the metal and locks them on to keep them from backing off instead of using a lock washer on them. Oh, those are on there pretty tight. And you don't want to put heat on those because that'll just melt the plastic in there and defeat the purpose of the lock nut. So I've got a bar stuck in here, and then put the right size wrench on it, and then take another wrench and put on there like that. Oh man, there it went. Okay. Oh, that one's turning the bar, turning this portion of it. Let's see if I can get the other one. You got it. Huh. Okay, what am I going to do here? Tighten these up just a little bit maybe on this side, since I've already got them loosened up. Now I'll see if I can get these loosened up without turning that bar. Okay, got that one. Hey bud. Yeah, okay, we got that one. Let's see. Let's see. Okay, it's gonna come. It's gonna come, Haji. Yes, it will. I got it. I didn't even need you helped. Yes, you did. You gave me some good help there. Yes, you did. You got that. You got that. Yes, sir. Okay. You can see the nylon insert inside that, so it's got this rolled edge over here that's crimped over that. And so this pinion gear here is for the tilt adjustment, angle adjustment, and it had a nut on here on this end, and then it had two collars on it, one up here behind the nut and then one out here towards the end of it. And I couldn't get those collars off of there, so the first one I finally heated it up a little bit with a torch, and then I used this wrench as a slide hammer just to slide up and down on it until I got it to moving, and I got it to come off. This other collar was pretty tight on there, and it got a nut that was on there like that. When I tried unscrewing the nut to force the collar, but it wouldn't work, it wouldn't move. So I heated this other collar up a little bit with some heat, and then I was able to use this nut and back it out and force that collar off until I got it moving. Then I was able to knock that shaft through and get it out of there. So this is pretty rusty. It needs to be cleaned up. I've got to decide whether what I'm going to do with it, whether I'm going to try to put a bronze bushing in here or what. There's not a whole lot of room in this one here to drill it out any, or to ream it out any to put a bushing in, but these things get rusty so fast in this country with all the damp air that we've got. If they're sitting and not being used any length of time, they'll get rusty, and then it'll make them rough to use. But these are kind of rough to use anyway, just because it's just metal on metal in here. Well, if I clean these up and polish them up real good, and then put some lubricant in here, some of that moly disulfide or something like that in there, then they'll work, and they'll probably work good enough for as long as I need them. But I got to think about what I'm going to do there as far as that goes. Well, I've still got to figure out how to get this pinion gear off of here, because I want to take that shaft out of there. That's rough too. I've got to clean that up. Got to do something with that to make it smooth it out. Probably good enough for, like I said, good enough for my life if I cleaned it up, but I have to figure out what I'm going to do. But I'm going to take all those shafts up to the basement, put them on the lathe and polish them all up, and then these two, they'll just get painted except where they go into the casting here, but I'll polish those up anyway. And then these other ones I'll polish up and make them nice and pretty, but make them so that they'll spin good inside of the bearings where they go.